Listen, I agree. We should protect the safety of every federal judge, but it is interesting because my Democrat colleagues were utterly silent during 4 years of the Biden administration when you had violent mobs outside the homes of Supreme Court justices unhappy with the Supreme Court's ruling in Dobbs, and the Biden Justice Department refused to enforce federal law and protect the justices. And my Democrat colleagues were perfectly happy with Supreme Court justices being threatened if they disliked the rulings that were coming from the Supreme Court justices. Unlike my colleagues, I believe we should protect judges regardless of whether I agree with them or not. We should protect their safety. And every time you hear a Democrat senator talk about protecting judges from acts of violence, you ought to ask them, why did they not have a word to say about the Biden Justice Department allowing mobs to threaten the families and children of Supreme Court justices night after night after night while Biden's Attorney General refused to follow the law? And with that,
Mr. Chairman, would you indulge me for a moment?
We indulge you every moment.
I appreciate that act of generosity. It's just something you said that I think is actually dangerous and should be addressed, and you're welcome. But when Judge Anderol was killed in New Jersey, the Republican colleagues in the Senate, their outpouring of support, their outpouring of concern, they're willing to work together on a bipartisan bill was extraordinary. It shows the truth of this institution that despite some of the fiery rhetoric that you were saying, we're really a bipartisan, working bipartisanship. Cornyn and Coons, after the incidents you're talking about, got together and actually passed a bill to better protect our Supreme Court justices, many of whom are friends of ours. You know, Gorsuch and I disagree on a lot of stuff. I knew his wife before he did. We studied together at Oxford. This implication that there was silence when there were threats on their people's houses is absolutely absurd. I remember the rhetoric and the comments, the concern from Coons. I actually distinctly remember you, Chairman, on more than once condemning those attacks on Republican-appointed jurists. To say things like that feeds just the partisanship in this institution and feeds the fiery rhetoric. And it's just plain not true. It's just plain not true. And I think you know that, but we can pull from the record from my colleagues in real time, literally days afterwards, condemning it. There's a lot of substantive things to say here, but to think that the lack of humanity when people's homes are being threatened was not in existence, I think that's unfair and really concerns me that you would say that in the way that you did.
Well, I thank my colleague from New Jersey. I will note, as John Adams observed, that facts are stubborn things. And it is existing federal law, 18 U.S.C. Section 1507, that makes it a crime to protest at a judge's home. And the law provides whoever with the intent of interfering with, obstructing, or impeding the administration of justice, or with the intent or of influencing any judge, juror, witness, or court officer in the discharge of his duty, pickets or parades in or near a building housing a court of the United States, in or near a building or residence occupied or used by such judge, juror, witness, or court officer, or with such intent uses any sound truck or similar device or resorts to any other demonstration in or near any such building or residence, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both. That is federal criminal law. Night after night after night, angry mobs were outside the Supreme Court justices' homes, and in the entire course of it, the Biden Justice Department prosecuted nobody. We had the Attorney General sitting at that table, and multiple Republican senators asked him, why are you not enforcing the law? What they are doing is a crime. And my friend from New Jersey said, it is a lie to say we, the Democrats, condone this. I would challenge, my friend, find a single Democrat senator on this committee holding the Attorney General to account for not enforcing this law. I was here at those hearings, and I do not recall a single Democrat senator saying to the Attorney General, you should arrest these people who are violating the law. You should protect the judges. I agree that there was general language against violence. but not a single Democrat senator that I ever saw in this committee was willing to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland to account for flagrantly disregarding the federal criminal law because the Biden administration agreed with the protesters and I think wanted those justices harassed at their home.
I really appreciate that you now shifted the accusation you made earlier. Your accusation was that we were silent in the face of protests at Supreme Court justices' homes. Again, we joined together in a bipartisan way, not only to condemn that, but to pass legislation to extend round-the-clock security protection, literally days. It was introduced May 5th, passed the Senate in a bipartisan fashion on May 9th. So if you're saying that we didn't criticize Merrick Garland...
Did the Biden DOJ arrest a single person under this law?
You are now changing the...
No, that is what I said. That is what I said.
Again, I'll pull the record.
Did the Biden DOJ arrest even one?
Again...
The answer is no.
My point to you is the accusation that the Democrats on this committee do not care about the safety of federal judges. I did not interrupt you, sir. I would appreciate if you let me finish. I am sick and tired of hearing the kind of heated partisan rhetoric, which is one of the reasons why we have such divisions in this country. The attacks we see from the President of the United States of America trolling and dragging judges through is what we should be talking about that puts people in danger. I'm simply taking issue with the claim that you made at the top that people on the Democratic side of the aisle do not care about the safety and the security of judges and said nothing. You said we were silent after people's houses were protested. That is a patent lie, sir. We were not silent. We took action. We've joined in a bipartisan way to protect those judges, as was done in a bipartisan way to protect a New Jersey judge after their horrific attack at their home. So I see you now trying to shift the debate to whether we talk to an attorney general. I'm simply taking issue with this accusation that somehow we Democrats are so bad because we don't call out threats to our judicial colleagues. And that is wrong. You can change the argument now that you want, but what you said was patently not true and was in fact a patent lie.
So I do enjoy the fact that my colleague from New Jersey raises his voice and says it's a patent lie and says he's doing so in defense of lowering the rhetoric. There is some irony to doing those two together. I'll point out that in the entire course of those remarks, Senator Booker did not dispute the central point I made, which is the Biden Justice Department arrested 0 people, prosecuted 0 people for violating the criminal law, and every Democrat senator on this committee was silent about it. And this was an ongoing pattern for months. And I would note also that the senator from New Jersey clutched his pearls about language threatening judges, and yet I do not recall a single Democrat senator of this committee saying a word when Chuck Schumer went to the steps of the Supreme Court and threatened the safety of the Supreme Court justices by name, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, and he said, "You have unleashed the whirlwind and you will pay the price." And not a single Democrat senator had a word to say about this. And so their outrage is selective. And I will give my colleague from New Jersey a chance to just answer a simple yes-no question. Should the Biden Justice Department have enforced the criminal law against protesting at a justice's home? Yes or no?
So the rank hypocrisy of Chuck Schumer apologizing the next day and you holding that standard for him and not for your president, who you actually rightfully described when you were running against him in a primary. I would love to run those tapes of how you perfectly talked about the danger of our president and his rhetoric. But now you are failing, in fact, blind to the very things you're accusing Chuck Schumer of. I don't think Donald Trump would know an apology if it hit him in the head. Never said apologizing. So again, you are very, very, sir, very, very deep into the waters of hypocrisy in your criticisms of Chuck Schumer.
So let the record reflect that Spartacus did not answer the question and did not tell us whether the criminal law should be enforced, because he knows the answer is yes. And he knows that the Biden Department of Justice was being wildly political and partisan in refusing to enforce the law because they disagreed with the Supreme Court justices' rulings. I have also, in addition to Senator Durbin, who's given his opening statement, I have a written opening statement from Chairman Grassley without objection.
Ranking Member of the Course Subcommittee, Senator Kennedy of Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Americans may be poorer under the Biden administration, but they are not stupid. They know what's going on here. I remember the Democratic leader's words of March 4th, 2020, on the steps of the United States Supreme Court, like they were yesterday. I want to tell you, Gorsuch, he said, not Justice Gorsuch, Gorsuch. I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions. Wow. Just wow. I think Matthew 12:36 is correct. For by thy words you shall be justified, and by thy words you shall be condemned. Now, the sad truth is that some, not all, some of my Democratic colleagues have been on a crusade to undermine the United States Supreme Court's legitimacy and the credibility of the federal judiciary for years. Today's hearing is just the next chapter in their federal power grab, and they've invited cameras. It's worth remembering the very real persecution that some Democrats have levied on very good people. It started with the savage destruction of Professor and Judge Robert Bork, which even the Washington Post, for God's sakes, the Washington Post said was a case of sentencing first, verdict afterwards. In other words, they gave him a fair and impartial firing squad. Then we saw the high-tech lynching of Justice Clarence Thomas. Then, for the first time in history, they weaponized the filibuster to kill Mr. Miguel Estrada's nomination, and they also demonized Justice Janice Rogers Brown, a very fine person. When the United States Senate confirmed 3 new Supreme Court justices, which the loon wing of the Democratic Party loathed, the campaign of threats ratcheted up. You remember the shouts. Let's pack the court, they said. Let's pack the court. And the political threats of some of the highest officials in our government fueled physical threats against the justices, and we know that. You have released the whirlwind, the Democratic leader said. Incensed protesters took to the streets, not outside Congress, not outside the court, but outside the homes of Justice Roberts, Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Thomas, and Justice Barrett. Federal law prohibits this intimidation, but the Biden Justice Department allowed it. You will pay the price, the Democratic leader said. In that spirit, angry protesters publicized the location of the school that Justice Barrett's children attend. You won't know what hit you, the Democratic leader said. A man with a gun, ammunition, knife, pepper spray, and zip ties went to a justice's home to assassinate him. Actually, his stated goal was to murder 3 justices. Not so suddenly, the ends justified the means for activists. Even inside the court itself, the Dobbs decision was not leaked by a left-wing blogger. Why? That's worth asking. You don't need to be Einstein's cousin to figure it out. They aren't getting their way. They aren't getting their way, so they want to change the rules. But the Constitution isn't a game, folks. And now some Democrats want Congress to override the Supreme Court of the United States and apply rules to its justices. The constitutional separation of powers means that no branch of the federal government can dictate how another should govern itself. That's black letter law. Now, why? This is to protect the people from abuse. The framers insulated the federal judiciary from political control to ensure that the justices would decide cases impartially, without fear of the kind of retaliation that fills the pages of some, not all, but some left of Lenin Democrats' playbook. Do my colleagues want the United States Supreme Court to tell Congress how to police itself? Even if Congress wrote a code of ethics for the Supreme Court, the court could rightly rule that code is unconstitutional. None of the laws we make here trump the United States Constitution. What's more, some Democrats want to use the lower courts as a cudgel against the highest court in the land by giving circuit judges the power to rule on whether justices should recuse themselves. Consider the conflicts of interest and the confusion that would breed. Unless you peaked in high school, you must know they will be breathtaking. Now, the absence of an ethics code written by Congress in statute doesn't mean that justices lack guidance or accountability. Justices and judges routinely consult the existing code of conduct, and federal law already requires recusal in certain circumstances like bias or financial interest. We all know that. The justices are also subject to strict financial disclosure rules, just like my colleagues here. Not only is this Democratic proposal unconstitutional, it is unnecessary. The attacks on conservative justices are targeted. They're exaggerated. The alarmism is affected. The danger isn't that rogue justices are operating without ethics. It's that Democrats aren't winning every fight and they find that reality intolerable. I've been disappointed by Supreme Court opinions too. But my Democratic colleagues should fill out a hurt feelings report and move on for the sake of the Constitution. Look, the agenda-driven story here is that Justice Thomas has a rich friend who had no business before the United States Supreme Court. For context, let's recall that history is littered with examples of public officials failing to disclose their every transaction. We can acknowledge it's required by law. It is. We can acknowledge it's the right thing to do.
And so the authority that could be centralized in a single entity is distributed across the entire pyramid, all the way down to the individual. And that makes your society remarkably robust. One of the things that I've observed as a Canadian watching you Americans for like 50 years, I can remember the 1980s, there was a widespread fear that Japan was going to emerge as the reigning financial master of the world. And that threat seemed to be
Member of the Course Subcommittee, Senator Kennedy of Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Americans may be poorer under the Biden administration, but they are not stupid. They know what's going on here. I remember
the 1990s.
the Democratic leader's words of March 4th.
Right from the individual upward. It's a consequence also of your willingness as individual citizens, and I also see this as characteristic of the United States. One of the things that characterizes your society that's very unique, and maybe unique even among Western countries, is that you wholeheartedly admire productive, generous competence. That's at the core of the American dream. Right? If people in this country are genuinely and that's your way. Really, recognition that technological prowess and positive goods, if they're in the right place.
Of the Army's discussion with Congress on the idea. We are ready to work with you, gentlemen. In fact, we must work together rapidly to fix fundamental problems with the Army. Since 2000, the list of failed Army modernization initiatives, such as the Comanche helicopter, the Crusader howitzer, and the future combat systems, has continued to grow. Between 2002 and 2012, the Army spent $50 billion on programs it eventually canceled. The record in the past 5 years has been better, but it still contains significant missteps. The Army recently spent $2 billion on a Scout helicopter that will never fly. Other cancellations of programs have followed, including the Strategic Long-Range Cannon Program, the Extended Range Cannon Artillery Programs, and the M10 Booker Armored Infantry Support Vehicle, as well as the Humvee. Fundamentally, the Army needs to decide how to adapt to the changing character of warfare and meet priority missions, particularly against China and Russia. Mr. Secretary, many ideas you propose in your transformation initiative and your budget will meet that mark. I think you'll find widespread support for increasing investments in long-range fires and air and missile defense, as you proposed. I would note, however, the lack of logistics investment in your plan, given the Army's central role in logistics in the Pacific. So perhaps we'll talk about that. Mr. Secretary, I think you'll find Congress a very willing partner when presented with convincing analysis that justifies investment changes. In particular, those changes should help American soldiers deter war and, if necessary, win in a convincing fashion. Close, or we will lose the defense expertise of many skilled workers. We need investment.
Judge, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senator.
Under Article 3 of the Constitution, federal courts have jurisdiction over only cases and controversies, which means under the Constitution it has to be an actual dispute, that federal courts cannot simply issue advisory opinions on a question they may have a view on. And one component of Article 3 jurisdiction is the requirement of standing, that in order for a plaintiff to have standing to bring a case, that plaintiff, at least generally speaking, must have a real and concrete injury. Is that right?
That is correct.
So, for example, that means that even if I might have a disagreement with some particular policy or some particular law, that I can't bring a case unless I am personally aggrieved by that policy or that law. So, for example, you're in my alma mater, Harvard, is currently being sued for its explicit and, in my view, egregious policy of discriminating against Asian Americans. Even though I think that policy is egregious, I, as an individual plaintiff, could not bring a lawsuit challenging it because I am not Asian American. Is that right?
If you brought a lawsuit, the court would have to evaluate whether you had an actual injury in order to be able to determine whether it had subject matter jurisdiction to hear the suit.
But if I'm not in the class being discriminated against, then I don't have the ability to bring the lawsuit. Is that right?
I think you'd have to have an actual injury. Certainly people, I think, who are in the class could claim that they had an injury for that purpose.
So now you're on the Board of Overseers of Harvard. If you're confirmed, do you intend to recuse from this lawsuit?
That is my plan, Senator.
Okay. We discussed yesterday how the standard for race discrimination was strict scrutiny. The court has laid out a different standard for gender discrimination. What is the constitutional standard that applies to gender discrimination?
Gender discrimination, the court has held intermediate scrutiny applies, which is that the government has to have an important interest, and the tailoring doesn't have to be as narrow.
Right. So yesterday, under questioning from Senator Blackburn, you told her that you couldn't define what a woman is, that you were not a biologist, which I think you're the only Supreme Court nominee in history who's been unable to answer the question, what is a woman? Let me ask you, as a judge, how would you determine if a plaintiff had Article III standing to challenge a gender-based rule, regulation, policy, without being able to determine what a woman was?
So, Senator, I know that I'm a woman. I know that Senator Blackburn is a woman, and the woman who I admire most in the world is in the room today, my mother. It sounded as though the question was...
But let me ask, under the modern leftist sensibilities, if I decide right now that I'm a woman, then apparently I'm a woman. Does that mean that I would have Article III standing to challenge a gender-based restriction?
Senator, to the extent that you are asking me about who has the ability to bring lawsuits based on gender, those kinds of issues are working their way through the courts, and I'm not able to comment on them.
Okay, if I can change my gender, if I can be a woman, and then an hour later, if I decide I'm not a woman anymore, I guess I would lose Article III standing. Tell me, does that same principle apply to other protected characteristics? For example, I'm an Hispanic man. Could I decide I was an Asian man? Would I have the ability to be an Asian man and challenge Harvard's discrimination because I made that decision?
Senator, I'm not able to answer your question. You're asking me about hypotheticals and
I'm asking you how you would assess standing if I came in and said, I have decided I identify as an Asian man.
I would assess standing the way I assess other legal issues, which is to listen to the arguments made by the parties, consider the relevant precedents, and the constitutional principles involved, and make a determination.
Okay, let's go back to your favorite topic of this hearing, which is the criminal law cases you had as a district judge, and in particular the cases involving child pornography. Now, your defenders, both on the Democratic side of the dais and also in the press, have suggested that the criticism that has been raised has been somehow cherry-picked, that it's only some specific examples. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to discuss each and every case you've had, because looking at your cases, and I've now examined all of the child porn cases you've had as a federal district judge, there is a very consistent pattern. So let's start, and by the way, I'm excluding the cases. So Senator Durbin and Senator Coons focused on the Nickerson case, the Fife case, the Nguyen case, and the Hilly case. I'm excluding those because those are not child porn cases. Those are actual sexual assault of a child, which is markedly different. And I will concede when you're dealing with sexual assault, you have been willing to impose stricter penalties. So let's focus on actual child pornography cases. And let's go through each of them, because if it's right that we're cherry picking, then you should be able to explain quite powerfully. Now, your justification is that you're following the statute. And as you know, 18 U.S.C. section 3553 lays out the factors that as a district judge you had to consider in sentencing. And let's start with the Hess case, United States versus Hess. Now, in that case, a man sent 6 pictures of a prepubescent girl that he claimed was his daughter to an undercover law enforcement officer. Officers found over 600 images of child pornography, including images of sexual acts being performed on prepubescent children. The defendant pled guilty, and I believe in all of these cases the defendant pled guilty. So there's no question about guilt. They came in and pled guilty in your courtroom. The charge carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years and a mandatory maximum sentence of 20 years. The sentencing guidelines recommended 151 to 188 months sentence. The government, as part of a plea deal, agreed to argue for 60 months, but didn't agree that that would be the sentence, simply that they would advocate it. And you, in turn, sentenced Hess to 60 months. So, under the terms of the statute, why did you choose to sentence Hess to the absolute lowest possible sentence you were allowed to sentence under law?
Thank you, Senator. I have spoken at length throughout this hearing about these cases.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. For 4 years under Joe Biden and the Democrats, this country witnessed an invasion at our southern border. It is an invasion that has no precedent in the history of our country. 12 million illegal immigrants were allowed to come into this country. And that was deliberate. It was not an accident. It was not negligence. It was a deliberate choice that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Alejandro Mayorkas and every Democrat senator and House member made. They looked at 12 million illegal immigrants and they saw what they believed would be future Democrat voters. And they were willing to allow Americans to be murdered, American women to be raped, American children to be brutalized by violent criminals day after day after day. In his first 71 days in office, President Biden released 184,241 illegal immigrants. That was a decision. By the way, it was a lawless decision. Federal immigration law says they shall be deported. No president has ever done what this administration did, which is say, we don't care about the law. We are all about partisan politics, and we're going to let them all go. And God help the communities we release them into. His first 71 days, Joe Biden averaged 2,600 releases per day. Let's compare that to the same 71-day period in 2025 under President Trump. Joe Biden, 184,241. Donald Trump, 9. Not 9,000, not 900, 9. That is a 99.995% reduction. At the State of the Union address, Democrats did something else unprecedented. They decided they wouldn't stand for the president. They wouldn't applaud for the president. The only thing they would do is emanate hate and rage for the president of the United States. So Alexis Nungaray was at the State of the Union address. I've gotten to know Alexis well, the mother of Jocelyn Nungaray, a beautiful 12-year-old girl raped and murdered in my hometown of Houston. The Democrats sat there and wouldn't applaud for the mother whose baby girl was taken from her. President Trump at the State of the Union address said last year Joe Biden stood before Congress and said he could not secure the border unless Congress passed new legislation. And as President Trump pointed out, it turned out we didn't need new legislation, we just needed a new president. You look at gotaways. Under Joe Biden, over 3 million gotaways. Who are gotaways? They're the most concerning of all of the 12 million that came into this country, because gotaways are the illegal immigrants we know were here. We see signs of them. We see tracks. But they didn't turn themselves in. Gotaways are much, much more likely to be murderers, much more likely to be rapists, much more likely to be child molesters, much more likely to be gang members, much more likely to be terrorists. Under the Biden administration, CBP was instructed at the southern border, be on guard for Hamas and Hezbollah and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists coming across the border. Why? Because they've declared jihad, and because the Biden open border policies extended a red carpet for anyone that sought to do harm. Now, if you look at what the Trump administration has done, it didn't just slow the bleeding, it turned it around. Daily border encounters down 93%, encounters with gotaways down 95%, illegal alien crossings down over 99%. These are historic, the biggest improvement in border security in the history of the United States of America. And yet, not a single Democrat is here celebrating that. Not a single Democrat is saying, thank you that our families are safer. They don't want our families safer. The Democrats have decided instead to fly down to El Salvador and have margaritas with MS-13 gang members. I genuinely don't understand that. Find me a community in America, find me a mom in America who says, you know what we need? More gang members who are raping more little girls. And this crisis is not about numbers, it's about lives. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Monaco, welcome.
Thank you.
You have a very important job. You're the number 2 person in the Department of Justice. Every U.S. attorney reports to you. The U.S. Marshals report to you. You are responsible for day-to-day operations of the Department of Justice, and in particular, the criminal justice aspects of the Department of Justice. Is all of that correct?
That's correct.
It is
How do you get a brand new AC and heating system in Greater Tampa from just $6,899? At Arctic AC and Heating, we make it simple for homeowners.
Senator Slotkin.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I said in your hearing, when you had your confirmation hearing, that my biggest concern with you at the helm was the potential use of the military in ways that contradict the Constitution or that taint what I hope we all want, which is an apolitical military. And when I asked you about whether you would accept an order that was actually given to your predecessor, Secretary Esper, Trump's SecDef, to deploy active duty troops against unarmed protesters and to, in Secretary Esper's words, shoot at them, shoot at their legs, you said this was all theoretical. Here we are, a few months later, you've deployed 4,700 troops to Los Angeles and against the wishes of the governor. And my colleague across the aisle was right. It is the first time since 1965 that we have deployed Guard troops without the permission of the governor. In all the instances he laid out, the president had sent in the military to protect protesters, not against the protesters. So you may dismiss it, but I feel like this is a fundamental issue of American democracy. If you love your country and you want an apolitical military, then it should be the last resort, not the first resort in our country to use them. So to get to the non-theoretical, have you authorized the uniformed military to detain or arrest protesters in Los Angeles?
Senator, I would just start by saying you're
Just-
not a protester if you're throwing concrete
100%.
at law
Arrest those
enforcement
people.
officers.
Throw them in the jail. 100%. But what you're doing is something different. Everyone knows this is a political decision, right? So we don't trust that you're using the best interests of the military, certainly, and of democracy on top of that. So have you given the order? That's all I want to know. It's not theoretical. For the U.S. military, not law enforcement. They can arrest all day long. That's their job. Do they have the ability, the uniformed military, to arrest and detain protesters currently today? It's a yes or no thing, authority.
It's sort of amusing the extent to which the speculation is out there. These troops are given very clear orders.
Then what is the order? Then list it out for us.
It's all
Be a
been
man, list it out.
It's all-
Did you authorize them to detain or arrest? That is a fundamental issue of democracy. I'm not trying to be a snot here. I'm just trying to get the actual, did you authorize them to do that?
All of these orders and what they're sent there to do are public. They are
Okay,
there
so
to.
say it. So say it. Yes or no?
I'd like to.
Please, yes or no?
As
Did
I've
you-
said time and time again through interruption, they're there to protect law enforcement,
they have
ICE
the ability
officers
to arrest-
who are trying to do their job,
Okay.
deporting illegals who were allowed in by the previous
So
administration.
they cannot arrest and detain citizens of the United States, the uniformed military.
As
is
we've
that right?
stated, if necessary, in their own self-defense, they could temporarily
Okay.
detain and
Have
hand
you-
over to ICE. But
have
there's no
you given-
arresting going
have
on.
you-
And you know this better than
Have you
you're trying to
authorized
play
the
political
U.S.
games.
military
There's
to
no
use
arresting
cyber
of U.S.
tools
personnel.
of the U.S. military against members of the protest? Have you authorized U.S. military cyber tools to investigate people participating in these protests? Yes or no?
Certainly in no way that I'd be aware of.
Okay, that's good. I love that answer. That's great. Have you given the order to be able to shoot at unarmed protesters in any way? I'm just asking the question. Don't laugh. Like the whole country. And by the way, my colleagues
What is
across
that
the
based
aisle.
on? What evidence would you
It
have
is
that an
based
order
on
like that
Donald
has ever
Trump
been given?
giving that order to your predecessor, to a Republican Secretary of Defense, who I give a lot of credit to because he didn't accept the order. He had more guts and balls than you because he said, I'm not going to send in the uniformed military to do something that I know in my gut isn't right. He was asked to shoot at their legs. He wrote that in his book. That's not hearsay. So you're poo-pooing of this. It just shows you don't understand who we are as a country. Who we are. And all of my colleagues across the aisle, especially the ones that served, should want an apolitical military and not want citizens to be scared of their own military. I love the military. I served alongside my whole life, so I'm worried about you tainting it. Have you given the order? Have you given the order that they can use lethal force against honor? I want the answer to be no. Please tell me it's no. Have you given the order?
Senator, I'd be careful what you read in books and believing it, except for the Bible.
Oh my God. So your former predecessor, I guess that's not enough for you. Okay, on Iran. I don't think there's a debate. There's like a cat fight going on in your own party about whether to go after Iran. Have you commissioned any day after planning? So any force protection, any use of ground troops in Iran, any cost assessments? Because I don't think we doubt what we can do as a country in the attack. It's the day after with Iraq and Afghanistan that so many of us have learned to be so deeply concerned about. Have you authorized day after planning?
As I've said, we have plans for everything, Senator.
Okay.
And I would also reiterate how we began, that there will be a classified portion of this 15 minutes after we adjourn.
The government is banning this $39 electric lighter next month, and this is your last shot to get the original high-powered version. There's a new next-gen electric lighter out there, and it's the most brutal one you'll ever own. But here's the bad news. In just a few weeks, regulators will force the only company that makes it to completely neuter its design. That means sluggish ignition, a pathetic flame, and a lighter that just won't deliver like this beast does right now. The current version, called Blizzara, is unlike anything you've ever witnessed. That's because it doesn't burn butane, propane, or any gas at all. Instead, it unleashes pure ion pulse technology, generating an 1800-degree plasma inferno, savage enough to slice through metal.
Objection, it will be admitted to the record. And Senator Slotkin, welcome to the committee.
Thank
and you
you.
are recognized.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for referencing the great Carl Levin as you introduced me. We miss him in Michigan. For those who I haven't met in my 1 week that I've been sworn into the Senate, I'm a CIA officer recruited after 9/11. I did 3 tours armed in Iraq alongside the military, and have worked for 4 different secretaries of defense, both Democrat and Republican, proudly, and watched them make decisions that literally determine the life and death of Americans in the dark of night. I'm also a Democrat representing a state that Trump won, right? We both won on the same ballot. So I understand that President Trump has the right to nominate his people. We are going to have policies that we disagree with. All of that, to me, comes very standard. What I think I'm most concerned with is that no president has the right to use the uniformed military in a way that violates the U.S. Constitution and further taints the military as that apolitical institution that we all want, right? And our founders designed the system so that, we had posse comitatus, that we weren't going to use active duty military inside the United States and make American citizens potentially scared of their own military. We went through our own experience with that with the British. As the Secretary of Defense, you will be the one man standing in the breach should President Trump give an illegal order, right? I'm not saying he will, but if he does, you are going to be the guy that he calls to implement this order. Do you agree that there are some orders that can be given by the Commander-in-Chief that would violate the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, thank you for your service. But I reject the premise that President Trump is going to be giving illegal orders.
No, I'm not saying he will, but do you believe there is such a thing as an illegal order that Joe Biden or any other president, Donald Trump, could give? Is there anything that a commander-in-chief could ask you to do with the uniformed military that would be in violation of the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, anybody of any party
Right.
could give an order that is against the Constitution or against the law.
Right. Okay. So are you saying that you would stand in the breach and push back if you were given an illegal order?
I start by saying I reject the premise that President
I
Trump will
understand.
be giving
You've done your
any
genuflecting
illegal
to him,
orders
but
at all.
This isn't a hypothetical, okay? Your predecessor in a Trump administration, Secretary Esper, was asked and did use uniformed military to clear unarmed protesters. He was given the order to potentially shoot at them. Helos flew low in Washington, D.C. as crowd control. He later apologized publicly for those actions. Was he right or wrong to apologize?
Senator, I was there on the ground.
And
I saw the
understand,
helo
and I
myself.
respect that.
I've been there.
But you're
I
about
understand
to
the
be
level
the
of threat
Secretary of
that was
Defense.
involved in that moment. I
Was
also
he right
understand
to? So he was
legality and the Constitution.
Sir, was he
and
right
the
or
laws of what
wrong
you
to
have.
apologize?
I'm not going to put words in the mouth of Secretary Esper or anybody else.
Of Americans in the dark of night. I'm also a Democrat representing a state that Trump won, right? We both won on the same ballot. So I understand that President Trump has the right to nominate his people. We are going to have policies that we disagree with. All of that, to me, comes very standard. What I think I'm most concerned with is that no president has the right to use the uniformed military in a way that violates the U.S. Constitution and further taints the military as that apolitical institution that we all want, right? And our founders designed the system so that, we had posse comitatus, that we weren't going to use active duty military inside the United States and make American citizens potentially scared of their own military. We went through our own experience with that with the British. As the Secretary of Defense, you will be the one man standing in the breach should President Trump give an illegal order, right? I'm not saying he will, but if he does, you are going to be the guy that he calls to implement this order. Do you agree that there are some orders that can be given by the Commander-in-Chief that would violate the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, thank you for your service. But I reject the premise that President Trump is going to be giving illegal orders.
No, I'm not saying he will, but do you believe there is such a thing as an illegal order that Joe Biden or any other president, Donald Trump, could give? Is there anything that a Commander-in-Chief could ask you to do with the uniformed military that would be in violation of the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, anybody of any party could give an order that is against the Constitution or against the law.
Right. Okay. So are you saying that you would stand in the breach and push back if you were given an illegal order?
I start by saying I reject the premise that President Trump will be giving
you've done your
any
genuflecting
illegal
to him,
orders
but
at all.
This isn't a hypothetical. Okay. Your predecessor in a Trump administration, Secretary Esper, was asked and did use uniformed military to clear unarmed protesters. He was given the order to potentially shoot at them. Helos flew low in Washington, D.C. as crowd control. He later apologized publicly for those actions. Was he right or wrong to apologize?
Senator, I was there on the ground.
And
I saw the
understand,
helo
and I
myself.
respect that.
I've been there.
But you're
I
about
understand
to
the
be
level
the
of threat
Secretary of Defense.
that was involved in that moment. I
Was
also
he right
understand
to? So he was
legality and the Constitution.
Sir, was he right
and the
or
laws of
wrong
what you
to
have.
apologize?
I'm not going to put words in the mouth of Secretary Esper or anybody else.
He said them himself. You don't have to. What are you scared of? Did he do the right thing by apologizing?
I'm not.
Troops in our cities, masked federal agents all over the place, political prosecutions, all of this corruption. I know it can feel like the republic is falling apart. But what I need you to hear is that the only way out of this spiral is to win in the midterm elections. That's the whole ballgame. And the Senate race in Georgia is the most important and competitive in the country. So please, this is something you can do right now that actually makes a difference. Chip in $10, chip in $20, do what you can. I appreciate your support.
Objection, it will be admitted to the record. And Senator Slotkin, welcome to the committee.
Thank
You
you.
are recognized.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for referencing the great Carl Levin as you introduced me. We miss him in Michigan. For those who I haven't met in my 1 week that I've been sworn into the Senate, I'm a CIA officer recruited after 9/11. I did 3 tours armed in Iraq alongside the military. And have worked for 4 different secretaries of defense, both Democrat and Republican, proudly, and watched them make decisions that literally determine the life and death of Americans in the dark of night. I'm also a Democrat representing a state that Trump won, right? We both won on the same ballot. So I understand that President Trump has the right to nominate his people. We are going to have policies that we disagree with. All of that, to me, comes very standard. What I think I'm most concerned with is that no president has the right to use the uniformed military in a way that violates the U.S. Constitution and further taints the military as that apolitical institution that we all want, right? And our founders designed the system so that, we had posse comitatus, that we weren't going to use active duty military inside the United States and make American citizens potentially scared of their own military. We went through our own experience with that with the British. As the Secretary of Defense, you will be the one man standing in the breach should President Trump give an illegal order, right? I'm not saying he will, but if he does, you are going to be the guy that he calls to implement this order. Do you agree that there are some orders that can be given by the Commander-in-Chief that would violate the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, thank you for your service. But I reject the premise that President Trump is going to be giving illegal orders.
No, I'm not saying he will, but do you believe there is such a thing as an illegal order that Joe Biden or any other president, Donald Trump, could give? Is there anything that a commander-in-chief could ask you to do with the uniformed military that would be in violation of the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, anybody of any party
Right.
could give an order that is against the Constitution or against the law.
Right. Okay. So are you saying that you would stand in the breach and push back if you were given an illegal order?
I start by saying I reject the premise that President
I
Trump will be
understand.
giving
You've done your
any
genuflecting
illegal
to him,
orders
but
at all.
This isn't a hypothetical, okay? Your predecessor in a Trump administration, Secretary Esper, was asked and did use uniformed military to clear unarmed protesters. He was given the order to potentially shoot at them. Helos flew low in Washington, D.C. as crowd control. He later apologized publicly for those actions. Was he right or wrong to apologize?
Senator, I was there on the ground.
And
I saw the
I understand,
helo
and I
myself.
respect that.
I've been there.
But
I
you're
understand
about to
the
be
level
the
of threat
Secretary of
that was
Defense.
involved in that moment. I
Was
also
he right
understand
to? So he was
legality and the
Sir,
Constitution.
was he
and
right
the
or
laws of what
wrong
you
to
have.
apologize?
I'm not going to put words in the mouth of Secretary Esper or
No,
anybody else. from
he
this
said them
podium.
himself. You don't have to. What are you scared of? Did he do the right thing by apologizing?
I'm not scared of anything, Senator.
Then say
I'm
yes or no.
interested
You
in
can say
upholding
no.
the laws and the Constitution
Okay.
in any
So
particular
Donald
scenario.
Trump asked for the active duty 82nd Airborne to be deployed during that same time. Secretary Esper has written that he convinced him against that decision. If Donald Trump asked you to use the 82nd Airborne in law enforcement roles in Washington, D.C., would you also convince him otherwise?
I'm not going to get ahead of conversations I would have with the president. However, there are laws and processes inside our Constitution that would be followed.
President Trump said in November that he is willing to consider using the active duty military against the, quote, enemy within. Have you been personally involved in discussions of using the U.S. military active duty inside the United States?
Senator, I'm fine. I'm glad we finally got to the topic of border security equaling national security because it's been abdicated and ignored for the last 4 years.
That wasn't my question. I'm just asking, have you been involved? You're about to be the Secretary of Defense, potentially. Have you been involved in discussions about using the active duty military inside the United States?
Senator, I am not yet the Secretary of Defense.
Right. I'm
if
just
confirmed, I would be party to any number of
So you
conversations,
haven't been in any of these
which I would not reveal what I have discussed with the President of the United States.
Just have you been in conversations? You're going to be in charge of 3 million people. The active duty that I know you care about, I believe you care about. So have you been in conversations about using the active duty in any way, whether it's setting up in detention camps, policing dangerous cities? Have you been involved in any of those conversations?
Certainly, I have been involved in conversations relating to doing things this administration has not, which is secure the southern border and not allow floods of illegals to enter our country through an invasion that threatens the American people. And there are ways in which the military is already playing a role in that, to include 5,000 National Guardsmen from Indiana and Texas who are at the border right now, allowing for border security. So there is plenty of precedent
duty military
for military
to
members
staff
enforcing
detention
our southern
centers?
border.
Our U.S. military is not trained in law enforcement roles. I think you know that, right? We've seen how that mission is difficult for them in places like Iraq and Afghanistan because that's not the training a uniformed military comes with. Do you support the use of active duty military in supporting detention camps?
Senator, everything we will do would be lawful and under the Constitution, but I recognize that this administration has abdicated its responsibility. President Trump is going to restore order at the border, prevent our enemies from invading, and yes, he has said
Sir,
mass
I get your
deportations
filibustering.
will be
I get it.
a part of what
In
happens.
the spirit of preserving the institution that I think we both care about, legitimately, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I've heard a couple of different things. One, you said you will not change the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is what governs justice system in the military. Yes or no? You said that earlier.
Those are
I'm just
laws,
confirming.
Senator, set by Congress.
Okay, so you will not go to change it. You will not attempt to change it. You also said that JAG officers are potentially people who put their own interests in their own medals and promotions ahead of the troops. Senator Lindsey Graham was a JAG officer for most of his life. Is that what you believe about those who implement our justice system in the U.S. military?
Senator, I was speaking about particular JAG officers I've had to deal with in my military
Are you
experience,
gonna get
not about a
involved?
member of the United States Senate.
Are you, as Secretary of Defense, going to get involved in the implementation of the U.S. Military Code of Justice?
Senator, ultimately, it will be a big part of my job to evaluate decisions vis-a-vis
Okay,
the
so I'll take
Uniform
that.
Code of
I'll
Military
take that as
Justice.
yes. Have you seen
but fairly.
is CQ Brown on your list in the Warrior boards to be removed from his position?
Senator, every single senior officer will be reviewed based on meritocracy, standards, lethality, and commitment to lawful orders they will be given.
Thank you, Senator Slotkin. I now recognize Senator Shaheen for a unanimous consent request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a request.
You know the real reason behind memory lapses? Well, I suffered with dementia for 3 years until I discovered this magical honey trick. If you suffer from memory lapses, confusion, or brain fog, pay attention. You need to see this. This could change your life, just like it changed mine. I managed to get rid of dementia, and no, it wasn't by taking strong medications or doing crossword puzzles. Quite the opposite. I got access to a report that was taken down under pressure from the industry. It talked about a Harvard PhD neuroscientist who helped patients with early forgetfulness regain mental sharpness. The report explained how he did it naturally, using a simple honey-based recipe. All I did was follow the 3 steps he taught. I took this mixture once a day, every night before bed. In just 4 weeks, my memory was like an elephant's. I started remembering where I left my keys, and people's names came back easily. I went back to sleeping deeply, waking up energized, and even felt my good mood return. In my daily life, simple things like finishing a sentence without
for being here today. Thank you for your service to this country.
Thank you, Senator.
Few nominees come into this room with all the necessary experience to do this job, to be Secretary of Defense. We get that. It's a reflection on just how big of a job this is. What I want to understand is whether or not you bring any of the necessary experience that this job requires. And here's where I'm concerned. Senator Coleman, in introducing you, and this is a quote, he said, "He has struggled and overcome great personal challenges," unquote. You walk in here saying that you've had personal and character issues in your past, including heavy drinking, which you wrote about. And you said, and this is a quote from you, that you said, "I sit before you as an open book." Yet you haven't actually said what personal challenges it is that you've overcome when you've been asked about them. So I'm going to give you an opportunity here to be as forthright as you say you want to be. So while leading Concerned Veterans of America, there were very specific cases cited by individuals about your conduct. I'm going to go through a few of them, and I just want you to tell me if these are true or false. Very simple. On Memorial Day 2014, at a CVA event in Virginia, you needed to be carried out of the event for being intoxicated.
Senator, anonymous
True.
smears.
Just true or false? Very simple. Summer of 2014 in Cleveland, drunk in public with the CVA team.
Anonymous smears.
I'm just asking for true or false questions. True or false answers. An event in North Carolina, drunk in front of 3 young female staff members after you had instituted a no alcohol policy and then reversed it. True or false?
Anonymous smears.
December of 2014 at the CVA Christmas party at the Grand Hyatt at Washington, D.C., you were noticeably intoxicated and had to be carried up to your room. Is that true or false?
Anonymous smears.
Another time, a CVA staffer stated that you passed out in the back of a party bus. Is that true or false?
Anonymous smears.
In 2014, while in Louisiana on official business for CVA, did you take your staff, including young female staff members, to a strip club?
Absolutely not. Anonymous smears.
So, is it accurate that the organization reached a financial settlement with a female staffer who claimed to be at a strip club with you, and there was a colleague who attempted to sexually assault her? Was there a financial settlement?
Senator, I was not involved in that. I don't know the nature of how that played out.
But you understand there was a financial settlement for a young female staffer who accused another member of the organization, not you, of sexual assault in a strip club.
We have multiple statements on the record referring to that.
But you claim you were not there when that occurred.
Absolutely not.
Now, the behavior I cited, if true, do you think that this behavior of intoxication, going into these type of establishments, women on your staff being so uncomfortable that they have to file these sort of harassment claims, do you think this is appropriate behavior for a leader?
Senator, the overwhelming majority of anyone who's worked for me, including the on-the-record statements that have been submitted to this, with their name on it, on the record, men and women who worked with me every day, are the overwhelming preponderance of evidence that testify to my leadership and professionalism in leading Vets for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America. My
Okay.
leadership has been completely impugned on these veterans organizations that did fantastic work.
Mr.
on behalf
Hegseth,
of the
I'm not
men
even
and
going to
women
go
fighting
into
overseas
the, I'm not even
and
going to go into the
advocating, and we managed our
accusations.
financial books with integrity across the board. How many people, everybody who runs a campaign.
I have limited time. I'm not going to get into the accusations that come from Fox News. Now you have some of your Fox News colleagues here. There were multiple instances of accusations against you about drinking on the job.
All
coming
anonymous,
in.
all false, all refuted by my colleagues who I worked with for 10 years at 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. and everything
The
in
challenge here
between,
for me,
and
Mr.
said
Hegseth,
they've only seen me be
is when
professional
there is
every
discussion
single time.
about personal challenges, and you admittedly had issues with heavy drinking. It's hard to kind of square this, to square the circle here. It's kind of a difficult thing to do. Let me ask you if I have about 90 seconds left here. If you had to answer these questions about sexual assault against you and your drinking and your personal conduct, would it have been different if you were under oath?
Senator, all I'm pointing out is the false claims against me.
Okay, I take it you do not want to answer that question. I walked into this hearing this morning concerned that you haven't demonstrated adequate leadership in your civilian roles, and this is a dangerous world we're living in here. It's unprepared for that mission. I'm going to leave with concerns about your transparency. You say you've had personal issues in your past, yet when asked about those very issues, you blame an anonymous smear campaign, even when many of these claims are not anonymous. Which is it? Have you overcome personal issues, or are you the target of a smear campaign? It can't be both. It's as each of these specific disqualifying accusations are, what concerns me just as much is the idea of having a Secretary of Defense who is not transparent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my 2 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Kelly.
Watch what magnesium does to your bowels.
If you have to wipe more than 4 times after you poop, here's why.
The Mayo Clinic confirms that stuck poop can cause these embarrassing skid marks in your undies. You see, when stuck poop causes a traffic jam in your colon, your bowels become too full. And as the pressure builds up, liquefied stool leaks around the stuck hard poop and stains your underwear. So how can you clear out all that stuck poop so that you don't have to worry about skid marks anymore? Well, do this to clear out stuck poop fast. Fiber helps you poop, right? Nope. What about drinking lots of water? Nope. Do this to clear out stuck poop fast. Kind of surprising, but diarrhea is actually a form of constipation. Weird, right? Most people think diarrhea and constipation are 2 different things. But the fact is, diarrhea is your body's desperate last-ditch attempt to get things moving again. So even though diarrhea is moving things along, not all of your poop cooperates and comes out. And the most stubborn poop gets left behind, stuck in the grooves of the colon. That leftover poop acts like Velcro and grabs onto new poop, causing it to pile up. So what do? Well, it's not glugging down glasses of psyllium or other fiber, because that makes things worse. Because according to New York's top gut doctor, fiber just adds bulk and weight to already stuck poop. and that's like adding more cars to a traffic jam. Don't take laxatives, choke down psyllium, or drink lots of water just to poop every morning. It's not the best way to unclog stuck poop. There's an easier way. It's called the 7-second poop method, created by Dr. Gina Sam, a top New York City gut doctor. She was one of the very first doctors to investigate the link between the health of our gut and excess.
Thank you. You're a very understanding chairman. I like that. I like that. Ms. Hegseth, you've written, and it's quote, "Oh yeah, and fire any general who hasn't carried water for Obama and Biden's extra constitution and agenda-driven transformation for our military. Clean house and start over." It's come to my attention that current serving military personnel have received emails threatening them with being fired for supporting the current DOD policies. One mail that was sent to a military officer with the subject line, "Clean house," reminiscent of your specific comment, states, and I quote, "With the incoming administration looking to remove disloyal, corrupt, traitorous, liberal officers such as yourself, we will certainly be putting your name into the list of those personnel to be removed. We know you support the woke DEI policies and will ensure you never again influence anyone in the future. You and the redacted spouse's name will be lucky if you're able to collect your military requirement," end quote. Now, I want to remind everyone that these policies that are being referred to date back decades, to the 1940s and 50s with respect to racial discrimination particularly, and administrations of both parties, including the Trump administration and their first party, caused those policies to be enforced. Mr. Hegseth, are you aware of these emails being sent to officers?
Senator, you mentioned the word accountability, which is something we have not had for the last 4 years.
Are you aware of these messages being sent to officers?
Certainly I'm not aware of that. It's not one of my efforts, but there's been no accountability for the disaster of the withdrawal in Afghanistan. And that's precisely why we're here today.
Excuse me.
Is that leadership has been unwilling to take accountability. It's the time to restore that to our most senior ranks.
You've written publicly that DI policy is a distraction and have military personnel walking on eggshells. Do you believe that emails like that are essentially threatening both a serving officer and a spouse and claiming that they'll lose their pension will have a distraction and detract from the lethality?
Senator, you mentioned the 40s and 50s, and you're precisely right. The military was a forerunner in courageous racial integration in ways no other institutions were willing to do. I served with men and women of all backgrounds because of the courage of people decades and decades ago. Incredibly important. However, the DEI policies of today are not the same as what happened back then. They're dividing troops inside formations, causing commanders to walk on eggshells, not putting meritocracy first. That's the indictment that's made by those serving right now.
Excuse me.
And why we're having this conversation.
All of your public comments don't talk about meritocracy. They talk about liberal democratic efforts that are destroying the military, that those people are our enemies. That's not meritocracy. That's a political view. And your goal, as I see emerging, is to politicize the military in favor of your particular positions, which you've outlined extensively, which would be the worst blow to the professionalism of the United States military and would undercut readiness, undercut retention, because I can see officers receiving these emails beginning to wonder very seriously if they should continue. Let me change subject for a moment here. You've been instrumental in securing pardons for several convicted war criminals. In at least 2 of these cases, the military personnel who served in combat with these convicted service members were not supportive of the pardons. They did their duty as soldiers to report war crimes. Your definition of lethality seems to embrace those people who do commit war crimes, rather than those who stand up and say, this is not right. So what's the response to your service members who personally witnessed these and courageously reported them to their superiors?
Senator, as someone who's led men in combat directly and had to make very difficult decisions, I've thought very deeply about the balance between legality and lethality, ensuring that the men and women on the front lines have the opportunity to destroy with and close the enemy, and that lawyers aren't the ones getting in the way. I'm not talking about disavowing the laws of war or the Geneva Conventions or the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Sir, I'm talking about restrictive rules of engagement that these men and women behind me understand they've lived with on the battlefield, which has made it more difficult to defeat our enemies. In many of the cases you're talking about in particular, sir, there was evidence withheld, there was prosecutorial misconduct, and as someone who looks case by case and defaults to the warfighter, to the men and women with dust on their boots, not the second guessers in air-conditioned offices in Washington, D.C.
Excuse me.
I look case by case and was proud to work with President Trump to understand those cases and ensure that our warriors are always looked out for.
Those cases were adjudicated by who? People in Washington or fellow non-commissioned officers who had also served, sacrificed, and believed in the ethic of the military? Who were the court-martial?
Senator, in multiple cases, they were actually acquitted, but
some
charges
cases,
lingered.
yes,
regardless of where those convening authorities were, yes, sir.
Some were, but others were convicted, and you asked for pardon. That's the only reason you asked for pardon, because they were convicted. But the other factor, too, is you've already disparaged in writing the Geneva Convention, the rules of law, all of these things. How will you be able to effectively lead a military in which one of the principal elements is discipline, respect for lawful authority? You have made statements to your platoon after being briefed by a JAG officer. Well, by the way, would you explain what a JAG-off is?
I don't think I need to, sir.
Why not?
Because the men and women watching understand.
Well, perhaps some of my colleagues don't understand.
It would be a JAG officer who puts his or her own priorities in front of the warfighters. Their promotions, their medals, in front of having the backs of those who are making the tough calls on the front lines.
Thank you, Senator Reid.
Interesting.
Thank you, Senator
Thank
Reid.
you very much.
Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr.
Here's how savvy investors are getting the government to send them tax checks.
This is a hidden gem that people don't know about.
If you're like me, I worked for 40 years, I'm still working. More important to work on the right things that will lead to passive income.
There's one income investment that pays better than real estate, it's easier to buy than stocks, and your returns are actually secured by law. Have you heard of income tax? Duh, right? I mean, we all have to pay it. But did you know there's a secret government-secured cash flow investment where people are getting checks in the mail, earning a percentage of the government's annual tax revenue? That's like $2.1 trillion with a T right now every year. So what do the returns on investments like this look like? Well, your typical dividend stock pays like 2, maybe 4% a year. It's pathetic. Real estate, you're looking to make maybe 10%, and that's after you pay mortgages and property taxes, a management company. That is, of course, even if you're rich enough to get into real estate. But with this tax-secured investment, which, by the way, has been off limits to everyday people like us for like at least the last 85 years, because the banking behemoths on Wall Street have just kept it secret from us so that they can hoard the income themselves. I mean, you won't believe how much this pays. The government even tells you exactly how much you're going to make before you even buy, and they have to pay you that return, even if the rest of the market tanks or inflation goes to 20% again, even if these wars in Eastern Europe and the Middle East turn into World War III, your returns are written into law. Think real estate, but on steroids, and without the insane risk or the hassle associated with real estate. So why haven't you heard of this before? Believe it or not, it's because these giant investment banks like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, these guys have kept it under wraps from people like us, operating through shell companies.
And thank you very much, Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing. Thank you for being here, Mr. Hegseth, and I want to join in expressing appreciation and respect for your service to our country, and thanks to all the veterans who are here today, and thank you for your service as the ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Committee. I hope we can focus on doing better for our veterans and doing better in management of the Department of Defense. There's always room for improvement. I think what we need in that position is not just better, but the best in financial management, because those decisions are life and death decisions affecting the 3.4 million Americans who serve our national security and our national defense and put their lives on the line. I want to talk about financial mismanagement at the two organizations that you headed, which are the only test of your financial management that we have before this committee, the Veterans for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America. You took over the Veterans for Freedom in 2007. In 2008, you raised $8.7 million, but spent more than $9 million, creating a deficit. By January 2009, you told donors that the organization had less than $1,000 in the bank and debts of $434,000. By 2010, revenue at the Veterans for Freedom had dropped to about $265,000. In the next year, it had dropped further to $22,000. You don't dispute these numbers, do you?
Senator, I'm extremely proud of the work me and my fellow vets did at Vets for Freedom. A bunch of young vets with no political experience, a small group, working hard every single day. We raised donor funds. And we have letters submitted for the record from almost everyone that worked with me every single day, including our chief operating officer, who will attest that every dollar we raised was used intentionally toward the execution of our mission, which is supporting the warfighters, exactly why we're here today, the warfighters in the Iraq surge. There was a campaign in 2008, Senator. It was Barack Obama versus John McCain.
Ask you another
we believe
question,
John McCain would be the right person to win, and so we spent
the tax
more.
Returns from that organization.
I'm glad they're for the record.
I'm going to ask to be entered into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
These tax returns are yours. They have your signature. And I'm going to ask that members of the committee review them because they're the only documents. I've asked for others. I've asked for the FBI report that would presumably document, it should have documented, this kind of financial mismanagement. And these are the 990s from that organization. By the year of 2011, donors had become so dissatisfied with that mismanagement, they, in effect, ousted you. They merged that organization with Military Families United, and thereafter, you joined a second organization as executive director.
In between, Senator, I went to Harvard University for 2 years and Afghanistan.
I want to ask you questions about Concerned Veterans for America. Again, another set of tax returns, the 990s from that organization. I ask they be made part of the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, both of those returns are now part of the record.
2011 to 2016. At the end of 2013, shortfall of $130,000. At the end of 2014, shortfall of $428,000. You had a surplus the following year, but then another deficit of $437,000. By the time you left, that organization had deep debts, including credit card transaction debts of about $75,000. That isn't the kind of fiscal management we want at the Department of Defense. We can't tolerate it at the Department of Defense. That's an organization with a budget of $850 billion, not 10 or 15 million, which was the case at those two organizations. And it has command responsibility for 3.4 million Americans. The highest number that you managed in those two organizations was maybe 50 people. Let me ask you, how many men and women now serve in the United States Army? What is Sen's strength?
Senator, I would like an opportunity to respond to
Well, I've asked you a
impugning
question.
of my leadership of a veterans organization. Concerned Veterans for America, you're on the VA committee, sir, and I appreciate your service there. The VA Accountability Act and the Mission Act were all brainchilds of Concerned Veterans for America. We used our donor money very intentionally and focused to create policy that bettered the lives of veterans.
Mr. Hegseth, I'm asking you a very simple question. How many men and women currently serve in the United States Army?
Senator, the United States Army, 450,000 on active duty, sir.
And how many in the Navy?
And the Navy is 425, sir.
Well, it's 337 this year. How many in the Marine Corps?
175,000, sir.
172,300. Those numbers dwarf any experience you had by.
Ever wondered what happens when legs like these almost suddenly become like this? Cases like this are practically textbook example of people not.
From female service members and combat veterans who support Mr. Hegseth's nomination. These women represent diverse viewpoints, from a retired colonel with over 25 years of service to an active duty Navy surface warfare commander to a senior airman. They support Mr. Hegseth and comment on his focus on merit, warfighting readiness, military training status, and the warrior ethos. So without objection, it will be entered into the record. And now I'm honored to recognize Senator Cotton for 7 minutes.
Mr. Hegseth, let's continue on this line of questioning about what's sometimes referred to as women in combat. I think that phrase is something of a misnomer. Many members of this committee have served in combat in the last 25 years, to include women and men. I'm sure all those men served with women, whether they were military police officers or they were pilots or whether they were intelligence analysts or medics or what have you. You served. I assume you served with women who were on the front lines as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And were those women anything other than skilled, brave, and honorable in their service?
They were some of the best soldiers I worked with, Senator.
So women have been serving in combat for a long time. Women have even been serving in combat units like infantry battalions for a long time in roles like medics or mechanics or what have you. So what we're talking about here specifically is women in ground combat roles in jobs like infantrymen or artillerymen or special forces. Now, until about 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. Under Secretary Panetta, those roles were opened up to women to serve in. Has President Trump indicated at all that he plans to rescind or alter that guidance?
You're correct to point out, Senator, that these are the decisions that the Commander-in-Chief will have the prerogative to make. He has not indicated to me that he has plans to change whether or not women would have access to these roles. However, I would point out, ensuring that standards are equal and high is of importance to him and great importance to me. Because in those ground combat roles, what is true is that the weight of the ruck on your back doesn't change. The weight of the 155 round that you have to carry doesn't change. The weight of the 240 Bravo machine gun you might have to carry doesn't change. And so whether it's a man or a woman, they have to meet the same high standards. And Senator, in any place where those things have been eroded or in courses, criteria have been changed in order to meet quotas, racial quotas or gender quotas, that is putting a focus on something other than readiness, standards, meritocracy, and lethality. So that's the kind of review I'm talking about, not whether women have access to ground combat.
Okay, so thank you. So you expect no change to that guidance, but as you point out, in these specific jobs, there are irreducible physical demands. We expect our intelligence analysts and our mechanics to be physically fit in the military, but it's different when you're in the infantry or the artillery. You just mentioned a few things. Let me point it out. An artillery shell weighs almost 100 pounds. An Abrams tank round weighs around 50 pounds. The M240 Bravo machine gun with its tripod weighs almost 50 pounds. The average weight of a full kit, ammo, water, commo, body armor for a soldier is over 100 pounds. Nothing you can do can change any of those things, right? That is physical reality.
Go ahead. Yes, Senator. And I would say the requirements to handle those things in a ground combat unit, as far as standards, can look different than those of a medic.